My name's Dan and I run Jump Fitness, and I'm going to break down the anatomy and physiology section of the Gym Instructor course for you. Should be really helpful if you are revising for your Gym Instructor exam or doing your coursework. And if you're just thinking about becoming a gym instructor or a personal trainer, a little insight into what's in store for you, but hopefully it's of use. So we are going to kick off with the respiratory system. We're going to follow a molecule of oxygen into the body, around the body, and see where oxygen is actually used for us when we're taking part in activity. But there's a few steps before we get there. So we are going to start with the structures of the respiratory system. So the first structures that air passes through are your nose and mouth. No prizes for already knowing what your nose and mouth are. The next structures, you might not have come across these terms before, are your pharynx and your larynx. So your pharynx is an area right at the back of your throat. You can actually have food in your pharynx. You cannot have food in your larynx. If you have, you're going to be choking. That's when food has gone the wrong way. Your larynx is actually your voice box. So you could remember that your pharynx can have food and your larynx is loud. Or in terms of the order, pharynx comes first, larynx comes last. Our next step for our air passing into our lungs is our trachea or our windpipe, and then our trachea branch off into our bronchi. Bronchi just means branches to our two sides of our lungs, so our left lung and our right lung. So we have a left bronchi and we have a right bronchi. Those bronchi continue to branch into smaller and smaller tubes, and those smaller and smaller tubes are known as bronchioles. At the end of our bronchioles, we have our final destination point for the air that we breathe into our lungs, and there are little air sacs called alveoli. A student once said to me, oh, a little pocket, is it? A bit like ravioli. So personal trainers always thinking about food. Yeah, if that helps you to think about a little pocket of ravioli deep in your lungs, brilliant. So we'll stick with that. So these are the structures that air is going to pass through, and now we can say that air, if it's in our alveoli, is kind of deep into our lungs. But why did that air make its way into our lungs in the first place? What are the mechanisms of breathing that we need to know about? We need to know about two mechanisms: the actions of the diaphragm and the actions of the intercostal muscle. And really they both have the same effect. They make the chest cavity bigger, and air needs to rush in to fill that newly created gap. So number one, the diaphragm. The diaphragm's a muscle that sort of cuts us in half, sits under the rib cage. As we breathe in, the diaphragm flattens, increases the amount of space in our air cavity, and like I said, air is going to rush in to fill that gap. The intercostal muscles, costal is another word for your ribs, so your muscles that are in between your ribs, when they contract, our rib cage expands, again increasing the volume of our chest cavity, encouraging air to flood into that chest cavity, into our lungs. A couple of, or a little bit more information that we need. Well, why do we care about this? What's going to happen to that air? Well, that we've breathed in? Well, the air that's in the atmosphere is 21% oxygen and less than 1% carbon dioxide. The air that we breathe out is 17% oxygen and 4% carbon dioxide. So it's clear that we have pinched a little bit of that oxygen. What's that? 4% of that oxygen, and we've used that in our body. And somewhere along the line, we've made some carbon dioxide, and we're going to breathe that back out. So we're going to find out where that happens a little bit later on in another video. And our final couple of terms that we're going to need, a little switcheroo, are some of our lung volume definitions. So number one, our tidal volume. That's just the amount of air that we breathe in. We can think of the word tidal, things coming in, things going out like the sea. So our tidal volume is the amount of air we breathe in with each breath. Our breathing rate is the amount of breaths that we take each minute. If we multiply the amount of air that we breathe in with the number of times we breathe each minute, that is going to give us our minute ventilation, the amount of air we can get into our lungs every minute. It's not going to be something we tend to measure quite often as gym instructors, but it might be something that doctors will be interested in if potentially you had asthma. So there you go, video number one, step one of the respiratory system. Hopefully that was of use to you.